So Rob, today we've got two guests coming in. Very interesting and timely topic about fertility benefits and innovative solutions. What are you excited to hear about?
I think the industry is ready for a lot more innovation out there, but to also address a topic that's affecting a lot more people than people realize, and that is infertility. And excited for Erin Fordham, who's going to be on today, to talk about her journey and also talk about a cool nonprofit that she started at the same time and her partnership with National Health Claim. Andrew, who flew in from Calgary to be with us today. So it's exciting to touch on not only, as you said, things that are innovative, that is only step one of probably so many steps to come. So I'm excited to get this going.
Awesome. Let's bring them in. I want to welcome Andrew Brandsma first. If you want to tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I am the Director of Sales for National Health Claim. 10.5 years now with National Health Claim, and we're growing exponentially. And part of it is because of what we're talking about today, just some innovative stuff. And it's really exciting to be a sales guy that has cool stuff to talk about.
Welcome, Andrew. And we've got Erin Fordham.
Hi, thanks for having me. I've been a group insurance advisor for just under 10 years with my firm called Alta Vista Planning Partners in Orillia, Ontario. And I'm also the co-founder of a not-for-profit organization called Oasis Fertility Support Network. It's really nice to be here and talk about this conversation that is so important.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I think a couple things that we talk about a lot in Benefits Alliance is innovation and innovative solutions. And in an industry that might not have been deemed innovative for the longest period of time. And we're so glad you're here today to talk a little bit about some of the strategies and really, Erin, what you kind of championed first off, and Andrew, what you've been able to support.
Let's get started. We're here to talk about family building and fertility benefits. Where are we at today and where do we need to be?
It's a bit of a minefield when it comes to fertility and family building specifically. 1 in 6 Canadians, 1 in 6 people in the world, according to the World Health Organization, struggle with infertility. And that's not including our friends from the 2S LGBTQ population who might need access to fertility treatment to start their family, or single moms by choice who just want to start a family, or single parents by choice who just want to start a family and need access to fertility. So family building affects everybody.
And we really appreciate your personal story behind this, but tell us your story, Erin.
I experienced infertility for 10 years. I got married quite young, and we took a while before we started our family. And then when we did, after about 2 years of trying to have a family and starting, we realized there's probably something more going on. And so we went on a deep dive into what is happening and where's the problem. And it turned out to be a male factor in our situation. So we went down a long road of trying to fix that issue with my partner, and then ended up using donor sperm to start our family. And after a lot of fertility treatment, we ended up with one little embryo who could, and that ended up being our son, who's now 2.5 years old.
Amazing.
So we were very lucky, I feel, because there are so many folks who go through that journey and don't actually end up with a live birth or a baby, and end up walking away from it because it's either too hard emotionally or too hard on their mental health, or financially the burden is just too much. And so they feel like they don't have what it takes to continue on down the journey.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Did you have a benefits plan that covered fertility drugs or fertility treatment at that time?
I did not. No, we were out of pocket for all of our expenses, except for the one funded cycle that we did have through the Ontario plan, which covered one IVF cycle, but it didn't include the drugs that were part of that cycle. So, I mean, we're transparent about our journey. We spent probably between $60,000 and $65,000 to have our son over the course of those 10 years and through a lot of different treatments. And we're probably somewhere in the middle of what most people spend to have a baby through fertility treatment.
Yeah. Good. Well, first, I just want to say thank you for sharing so openly your story. I know that I first heard it a while back, and definitely, I'm sure our listeners, there's so many people that can relate to your story. And that's why we've brought you here today, to talk about openly the costs, the coverage, the challenges, and most importantly, what are some of these creative solutions that are out there? And I'm sure that employers and even plan members and their families can learn something today. I certainly did. So I want to go over and talk to Andrew. And when we talk about building creative solutions, National Health Claim, first of all, what is it? Tell our listeners, what is National Health Claim?
Yeah, so essentially we're a software solutions company, but we also are a claims adjudicator. So we're, I guess, a smaller version or a simplified version of a TPA, and continuously just reinvest in the technology and the solutions to bring to advisors to position with their clients. And this came up actually quite quick, Erin, if I think about our timeline. Mm-hmm. And as we launched a new system last year, it's given us an ability to really create quickly and come up with the marketing and everything. We've got a whole team in place for all of this now. So I was their 5th employee in 2013, the only salesperson. And now we're at 35 or 36 employees here in 2024. And the sky's the limit. We're happy to keep working on initiatives like this.
And I think that's neat for what your organization does, is that people think, well, I've just got my traditional insurance carrier. But that traditional insurance carrier might have other limitations in their plan design, depending on the size of the group. They might offer flexibility in certain coverages, and they can be very flexible, as we know. But to be able to provide something unique on as a side bucket is what we want to chat a bit about. So Erin, what led you down this road specifically around fertility coverage that maybe you weren't seeing in a benefits plan? Or talk to me a bit about what you were seeing from carriers that still led you to say, this isn't enough, we got to do something different.
Yeah, totally. Even after going through my fertility treatment and not having any coverage, and I actually thought through the journey, there's no way this is ever going to happen, because the cost of fertility treatment is unpredictable and it's so high. And I just know what that would do to a premium of a small group. If there was 1 or 2 big claims in a year, how that would impact the premiums going forward. And so I thought, how are we ever going to fix this? And it wasn't until, 2.5 years after having my son, and things are starting to change in the industry a little bit, where we're seeing more solutions pop up. We're seeing them pop up, flexibility on the insurance company side, where they're saying, yeah, we can add fertility drugs now, or yeah, we can add some treatment coverage to a maximum per person per year. We're seeing great not-for-profits in Canada, like Fertility Matters Canada and like Conceivable Dreams, who have a campaign called Fertility Benefits Matter, that are helping employers understand where the needs are and helping employees understand how they can talk to their employers about fertility benefits. And so we're starting to see movement. We saw the big 5 banks last year cover fertility treatment. That was a huge change in the market. And from there, we're starting to see a lot more carriers offering coverage. There's a huge gap, though, still, for the small business owner who needs to cover something for their employees where their current carrier doesn't have an option. And so that's where this all came about. I thought maybe there's a way we can structure something, and something that's innovative and external from their traditional claims experience, where we can cover fertility and it not actually expose them to any risk. So that's where this kind of came about.
Love it.
So you've got a really unique perspective, because you are a business owner who would see the bills for your insurance.
Yeah.
You're also, in this case, the claimant, the plan member, and family. So as you look at what's out there in terms of, what I learned in family building, beyond sort of the cycles, the drugs, all of the treatment, talk to us about even that life journey. What do you see today? And I'm going to say in all walks of life, male, female, family building, age, all of these factors. What are the options that are now there that weren't necessarily there even 20 years ago?
Yeah, for the 1 in 6 Canadians that are diagnosed with infertility, which is classified as a disease by the World Health Organization, a disease of the male or female reproductive system, defined by failure to achieve a pregnancy after 12 months or more of regular unprotected intercourse. That would be the definition of infertility by the World Health Organization. And so for the 1 in 6 adults at childbearing age that affects in Canada or around the world, Yeah, there are lots of treatment options here in Canada. It's a wild, wild west out there with fertility treatment. It's private healthcare. Mm-hmm. And so the cost ranges from fertility clinic to fertility clinic. And there is a funded cycle in Ontario, but there are many provinces in Canada with zero funding when people are looking to get help and support monetarily. There are some provinces in Canada that offer a grant, and it's a tax grant. But yeah, most people going down that road, when they find out this isn't working naturally, they engage with a fertility clinic, and then they'll take them on a course of different treatments until they hopefully achieve a successful pregnancy, which could take anywhere from 1 month to 10 years, 15 years. It just depends on, and a lot of the time there's an unexplained infertility diagnosis. But 1/3 is usually male factor, 1/3 is usually females, and 1/3 is usually unexplained. And so I think there is a big stigma around it always being a female problem. And I even know in my own journey for the first 3 years, I was like, something's wrong with me. I'm going to create the perfect period. I'm going to do all the things, see the naturopath. And then it wasn't until we actually got the sperm check that we realized, oh my God, this is the problem. Well, that seems like an easy fix. It wasn't, but yeah, we were lucky that we had a diagnosis where a lot of couples actually don't know what's going on.
When I think about a benefits plan and an employer building something for their employees, you want to be able to address, not only protecting day-to-day claims, but these unusual circumstances that can be high cost or different types of costs. There's medical, physical, financial well-being. That's what we always talk about, right? So, Andrew, how do you see this as, number one, what's the impact to employers? What does that give them when they're giving options to their employees?
Yeah, I think in the last number of years, I would say not quite, I don't like talking about COVID anymore, but COVID brought forth a lot of, I think, things that were under the surface that were problematic. So mental health was the first sort of thing that came up, and you hear about it every single day. I'm sure you don't get it every day. You get an email, something about mental health in the workplace. It's not going anywhere, but the options are so limited, and they still kind of are. National Health Claim is a top-up HSA or wellness provider to about 90% of our groups. So we're not standalone often, but the ability to have a detached HSA and wellness program, but then the employer gets to actually say, we want to invest in employee mental health. We want to add another $500, $1,000 a year in this bin or this bucket specific to that expense. And then it just opened up the floodgates of options. So then Erin came along and said, we need to build something because there's just not a lot of great options. There's some, but we need something where the employer can go, hey, maybe we'll start small. Maybe we'll start at a couple $1,000s a year per employee. We know our budget. We know we're going to experience X percentage utilization, but it still will help this person along their journey financially, even if they can get a few $1,000 back for the drugs. And so, again, they're showing their employees they care about their family journey and their mental wellness journey if they do both. And often it's closely tied together, the whole process. So, yeah.
And then there's so many traditional plans, Andrew, that might be the same, like vision. Well, why is it $200? I don't know, because it's always been $200. Or
Right.
Hearing aids are always $500 every 5 years. Why? They're not $500 anymore. And so like I think the modernizing plans is such a key topic, hitting those 3 areas of well-being that Carolyne just mentioned. And you look at it that if there is something that happens within a lot of organizations, we have a lot of advisors that will have said, yeah, my client came to me and said, I want to cover this for Joe, or I want to cover this for Shirley, just because she's a key employer, he's a key employee, and it's going to be very expensive. How can we get it covered? Where, they, at the same time, you're right, as one of our jobs is how do we create cost stability for organizations in a time when everything is getting more expensive? So to be innovative in that approach, I think is key. And so it opens so many different doors. So maybe, Erin, speak to a little bit about how you design the fertility. And I find this interesting. There's 6 of us in this room, and you said 1 in 6. And my wife and I had the same journey, right? So technically, just in this room, there's 33% of us that struggled with infertility.
Yeah.
And, it's the same. It's like with our journey, which was, respectfully, like kind of 16 and 12 years ago that we went on this journey. There wasn't many options. It was just, well, it is what it is. We're gonna have to pay it, and because we wanted family. And so how did you work with Andrew's firm to design, based on your experience, of what a proper plan design maybe look like? And did, maybe the next question from there, after you designed it, how many employers put their hand up and said, this is fantastic? It's exciting.
Yeah. So at first I wanted to give employers the flexibility to still have choice in what they were covering, just based on their experience or based on what their affordability was. And so we designed it so that you can cover just fertility drugs, because in the traditional model with the fully insured insurance plan, fertility is still labeled under lifestyle drugs, which I just read the definition from WHO on infertility is a disease. So how are we not treating fertility drugs just like we're treating diabetes drugs, just like we're treating cancer drugs? How is fertility drugs, obesity drugs? How are we not treating infertility the same when it's labeled a disease? And so that's one of the soapboxes I'll get on today.
Well, sure you are. Trust me.
But yeah, when it comes to designing the flex plan, I just wanted employers to have choice where they could just cover drugs if they wanted to top up because they're not covered on the traditional model, but then also the ability to cover the whole enchilada, where they cover treatment costs, any testing that needs to be done, even travel costs. We have friends in Sudbury, Ontario, who travel to Toronto 5 times a week for a cycle, back and forth, a 3-hour drive each way. And that's a huge expense. We have employees who take months off work just to do fertility treatment, which creates a huge amount of absenteeism. And then they come back to work and there's a huge lack of presenteeism because they can't actually focus on the job when they're just wondering what's going to happen in this cycle. Am I going to have an embryo? Am I going to have a baby? Am I going to have a family? So there's a whole lot around that for employees where a little bit of financial support can be very helpful to somebody on their journey. And so opening up this Flex HSA where it's just for fertility, either drugs or treatment, and then the employer gets to choose how much annually they're going to allot per employee. And then only people that need access to that treatment would be able to use that HSA. And usually fertility treatment, hopefully, the biggest hope is that it's only for a year or two. And then that person has their baby, and it might not be the employee, it might be the partner of the employee who's in treatment, but it's still helping the employee get through it. And usually it's only a couple of years where if we had a diabetes diagnosis or a cancer diagnosis, we're talking the rest of their life that they're having these claims and having this thing go on. Whereas this is actually just a short-term need, even though it is a higher expense, not as high as a lot of the drugs that are currently on the market even, that we are including in experience rated benefits right now. And so that was my big question is like, why not fertility if we're covering all of these other things? Because you ask anybody who's been through it, it is not a choice. It is not a lifestyle choice.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
I'm not getting a boob job. It's still private healthcare, but it's a totally different animal because we're talking about something that you don't feel like is a choice, and it's something that is a basic human right, which is starting a family.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well said. And then the other aspect where you think of just from all the emotional, right, stress that goes under in that scenario. And, and I mentioned, funny, you bring back lots of memories now. It's crazy. And you'd hear people like who would say that, like there was a struggle around, like someone say, oh, we just turned up the lights and we got pregnant. And I'd be like, oh, that's super. I got to go to the LCBO and get a nice bottle of wine. As soon as my wife hears this, it's going to be like, it's going to set us back again.
Totally.
And, the importance, I think, now of providing those options today. So creating kind of unique buckets, and then it's only paid for when it's used. You're providing that great resource. You talk about a way to attract and retain staff, right? Because you're right. There's no, that I look at that as an employer, you'd say that, hey, that person's going to be really, really grateful that in a time of need when it's not an option, I'm spending the money, and this is what we to go down this journey, as you said, to start a family. So good for you to take this on.
It's well known in the fertility community that Starbucks covers fertility. And there's a whole Facebook support group online designated to Starbucks employees and their fertility benefits, and how people are attracted to that. People are working part-time there just to get access to their fertility benefits. Like, the need is so great, and it is there. It's very, very transparent when you get into the online community. The problem is there's a stigma attached to infertility, and I can be really transparent and say, people that know me and have known me for 10 years wouldn't have known that I struggled through infertility until I was a year postpartum, or even, I think I first talked about it when I made my pregnancy announcement, how hard it was to get to here. Mm-hmm. And so you don't see what's happening behind the scenes. You don't see the people that are struggling, because the struggle is so real for those people, and we try and keep it so private. It's the most private thing that you'll ever go through trying to start a family. You keep it really close to your heart and close to your relationship. And infertility takes it right out of the bedroom and into the lunchroom, where somebody makes a pregnancy announcement, and then all of a sudden, and that's celebrated in the lunchroom for the employers, mm-hmm. but the person that's struggling with infertility still has to continue to hide that fact that they're maybe going to treatment that day, or maybe they're, maybe they just had a loss, maybe they just experienced something that was very traumatic, and it's a really, really hard thing for people to go through. It's a reproductive trauma.
So how have companies responded since you've started solution with National Health Claim?
It's still pretty new. Mm-hmm. So it's only actually been about a month. I put it out first to a few very trusted advisors and people who I thought would give me honest feedback, because I thought, before we take this to the market, let's, mm-hmm. and Carolyne was one of those people, which mm-hmm. is what brought us to here today. Mm-hmm. And she just said, this is so great. Let's talk about it on the podcast.
If I can, I want to just jump back to something you guys were saying there about attraction and retention of employees too. I mean, if you haven't seen it, I mean, you've seen it. There is a pretty big shift in the demographic of the workforce in the last, let's say, 5 years. And I say this at all of my speaking engagements, but almost 60% of the workforce is millennial or Gen Z. Right? I'm an old millennial. I'm a Gen Xer at heart, and I say that to everybody that wants to hear it. But our generation and younger have career minded. They're trying to start families later. And when they go for a job offer, it's not just, okay, here's your salary and your traditional benefits plan. Like that is sort of the stock standard expectation, I think, as a Canadian, even though that's not the data. The data is, there's quite a large percentage of employers that don't offer any benefits. But I think when you come out with stuff like this and you say, hey, you get this and you get this, we also have a flexible spending account, and it's got coverage for additional mental health benefits and fertility and additional dental carve-outs or whatever it is. That's what this generation likes. They like choice. They like to be in control of those decisions and make, I want to put this much here and this much here. I don't want to be dictated to a benefit that I may not use. So I think if I can say, in the last 5 years of my career here, that has been the most dramatic change, is the number of clients adding health spending, but now adding wellness spending as a combination, and letting the employees decide where that's going to work best. And I'll say this, it's also a reaction just to the DEI conversations that are also happening constantly. What a better way to say to an employee, listen, you get this money and you put it where it's going to work best for you. We value you as a person, put it where it's going to help you out the most. And I think missing that, you're gonna hurt. Organizations will hurt finding good talent if they don't start talking about adding flexible things that aren't budget breakers. Like, these are not, if you're already budgeting $500 for a health spending account, why not add other things under the same budget, but let your staff be empowered to choose,
And this comes down to Andrew, which I totally agree with you on, is having a trusted benefit expert as your advisor.
Totally.
To look at modernizing plans, look at strategies that, that aren't necessarily going to break the bank. Because some people might hear this and just think, oh, wow, great. So I'm just going to, now my plan's going to quote unquote cost more. Well, not necessarily, right? Correct. It's around design, it's around funding, it's around strategy, like meeting your demographics needs. And you're right. I think that shift in focus, where when benefits were created, 45, 50 years ago, or was around the idea that, I think the first dental plan came from the federal government, was looking at strategies to give pay raises to the union, and they covered dental. And that's how they all started, really. They said, we'll cover your dental bills. And obviously dental bills weren't then what cost what they are today. But if you're looking at the way everything's shifted, that most, like if someone's married or with a partner, that they're both working full time because costs are so much more expensive just in general. So having the ability to tell somebody to say, you have these options, you have this choice, I think is that they're going to be able to keep more money in their pocket, which if you're looking, again, talking stress, right? Obviously, whether it's infertility or mental health or just money stress, like money's still the leading cause of stress in people's lives. So this is kind of a unique way of looking at options, especially those big ticket items that can get real expensive. Like we joked with our friends once they found out, you know, they were like, well, I'm really sorry. I'm like, well, hey, it was just, this is our journey. And maybe not to raise each child's not going to cost $250,000 a year till they're 22 years old. Now it's going to cost us $270,000, right? That's just our journey, right? And I'll be working that much longer. But
yeah. So Andrew and Erin, I'm going to ask both of you this question is, you know, when it comes to building company culture and values and then deciding upon benefits, how does this tie into that? I feel like, you know, in the past, when people put in a healthcare spending account, they said, here's your $500, use it for whatever you want. And that's a little bit hard, right? Because education is key, and even understanding what you're covered for already, you're not covered for. So how will this help, you know, not only with defining culture, but help with employee plan member and their families even understanding their benefits better?
So I think it actually ties back to what we were just saying about the percentage of the workforce that is more likely to deal with this than previous generations. And also an employer that shows that they actually care about certain aspects that are really challenging in people's lives. Because you could have bad teeth, that's one thing. But if you're trying to start a family or you're struggling with your mental health, an employer that comes forward and says, hey, when you work for us, we actually put money aside for certain things that may be part of your life now or come up in the future. To a millennial or a Gen Z who keeps a job for an average of less than 2.5 years now. So there's so much movement now that whole loyalty to one employer thing. I mean, that's been gone for a while, but it's even more prevalent in these younger generations. And so if you're not offering it, but the company across the street that does a similar thing does, very hard for you to keep that person working for you. It's not about salary and just giving me an extra $1 an hour raise. That doesn't resonate nearly as much as an employer who comes out and says, listen, we actually care about this stuff and we're budgeting a lot of money just to help you along that journey. And so I think especially mid to large size employers have to really have a focus on that. And this is one way of doing it. And I said that to Rob when we got here today. This may not be the best overall option in the world, but it's something that you can say, listen, there isn't a whole lot out there in the traditional space, but there are ways of doing it, and we can start small and we can build on it. And I think that's got a lot of power to it.
So Erin, you've got all three hats: advisor, business owner, plan member. Like, what's your thought of this?
Mom.
Oh, mom. Yes, you're right.
That's right.
You're right. Everything. So what is your thought on how it's shifting, you know, the culture and the education of this area?
I definitely think like the need for flexibility in the plan is growing, and I feel like that's been something we've talked about in this industry for a while now. You know, the need for flexibility for the employee, for the business owner. I hear that from my people, them wanting flexibility in the plan. We implemented a healthcare spending account 3 years ago and sort of dumbed down our plan a little bit to allow for that. So had we done that while I was in fertility treatment, I could have used my HSA dollars towards my treatment, because even if you just have a traditional HSA of $1,000 a year, your employees could use that for fertility. You don't have to have the fertility HSA. That's just a top up specific to fertility benefits. So it's good to know that for employees too, they might be able to still spend that on some drugs or some treatment, even if they just had the traditional, like the full-fledged HSA, right? But nice to have a larger amount if they use the flex plan that we put together.
I've got one more question for you before we wrap things up, and it is a bit of a personal one. We talk often about how management is that front line. You observe if someone is struggling. You might not know what they're struggling with, but you know something's up. It's showing up in the lunchroom at the party that just happened, the aftermath of that. It's showing up in maybe work performance. What advice would you have if someone came to you from your team and said and shared with you, disclosed to you, here's what I'm struggling with, here's why it's a hard day for me? Any advice on what you would say back that helps those managers listening out there? What would you say back to help, show the path to help?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carolyne, and thank you for asking it, because it is so important to those who are struggling. I think most importantly, there's so much grief along the fertility journey. There's a lot of loss, there's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of anxiety around the unknown and not knowing what's going to happen and where you're sort of going with your life. And so just giving people space to grieve if they need it, or an out, of a company event, or company baby showers aren't really a thing, but if there was anything that's sort of surrounding that, I think it's always helpful to give people an out if they need it, and some space to grieve. I also would ever caution against ever asking, when are you going to start a family, or when are you having kids, or are you pregnant? Oh my God, please don't ever ask anybody that question, ever, 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 no matter what. So yeah, I think giving them the space to speak about it if they want to, or to not, is also just as important.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well said. And I used to want to slap some buddies who kept asking me those questions. We're pregnant. When are you getting pregnant? And with that, why don't you talk a little about your nonprofit? I think everybody'd love to hear about what you, through your journey, this nonprofit you started.
Yeah, thank you. I am passionate about this, and I'm a big believer that the opposite of being alone is being in community. And this journey, if you've been on it before, you feel very alone, because you feel like nobody understands. Everybody else is getting pregnant everywhere around me by accident. And I just feel alone, like I don't have anybody to talk to about it. And even you have your partner to go through it with you, but it still feels very isolated. And so when I was going through my journey, I found a community of people who we would get together monthly, other women who were in the same boat, in the waiting, and we would just get together and just talk about it. We would eat donuts and drink coffee, and we would talk about how hard it is and that it sucks, and that, and we would just do life together. And I still do life with those women today. And about a year postpartum, along with a whole team of people, we founded a not-for-profit called Oasis Fertility Support Network, where we are growing more groups just like that to help people connect around their diagnosis. And so we now have 6 operating support groups in person in Ontario and 5 virtual. And we have big goals to expand to 20 in-person groups in Canada this year. We're a Canadian national nonprofit. And we're opening all kinds of doors for support on different levels: daily support, monthly support, and weekly support. So all the different mental health and emotional support.
Andrew, I got a question for you as well. Because on a healthcare spending account claim, you get a little bit more detail. So it might say Rob used his $500, or Rob used his $500 in medication. Yeah. How do you ensure that privacy isn't broken in a scenario where we will know that X person made the fertility claims? Have you taken that on as a national health claim?
That was probably the second
my big concern
conversation that we had.
Yeah.
So you're right. We could get more detailed in how we process claims. Right now, as a company, we generically, company-wide, gather the data into 4 different bins. But there's always the utilization report. And if there's an administrator who's nosier than they should be, you could see by utilization, not necessarily what they use, but, why has Carolyne spent $2,500 out of these accounts, but someone else has only spent $500? You kind of know that they've dipped into it, right? So there's not necessarily a way to completely avoid that. But what we have built is, for the subcategories, we call them, so you add the fertility with its own limit, it's going to actually be hidden from regular plan admin view, and only an authorized, probably an advisor to start, who's an administrator on the account with their client, can see that report. So they can at least go back to their client and say, it's definitely being used. Obviously, we can't share with you by whom, but we at least will have some data, but it won't reflect directly to that employee, where an administrator can go, oh, look at that, like these 4 people are using it. So that's how we're trying to protect the employee's privacy on that.
Well, and you're right. I think that's the biggest concern that, that obviously you just can't, as Erin addressed, but just to come up and ask somebody when are they thinking of starting a family, or are they thought about it? That obviously you're never going to address that individually with somebody, but so to ensure that privacy, it's great that there's an option. And I think that's something that definitely keep pushing towards, because it sounds like you could create other unlimited buckets, whether it's around if a company wants to provide greater mental health support beyond the normal practitioners. We got to understand and have those same kind of guidelines around other areas for sure. Okay.
Yeah, we built it as just to get a little technical, it's a toggle on each subcategory. The default option will be non-viewable to the standard plan administrator, but we can enable it for any other plan administrators that have been approved for it. So if the HR director has been approved by the CEO and the advisor as somebody who only views information, and they send us confirmation that it's okay, we can turn it on. But our initial opening of it will be it's hidden.
Hey, so Erin, I've got one more question for you. So as people, get more comfortable talking openly about fertility and family building, what are some of the assumptions or some of the things that you would say that people just don't know? Like something that is surprising on your journey where people make certain assumptions, or you find along the way that, no, actually, here's something you might not know about fertility and family building.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is how disruptive it is to the day-to-day life. Like it's all consuming. If you're going through an IUI cycle, you can look that up, or an IVF cycle, there's a big difference between the two. Regardless of the cycle, for treatment, you are at the fertility clinic sometimes every day for 2 weeks at 7:30, at 5:30 a.m. to get your spot in line, to wait for your ultrasound, to wait for your blood work. And then you're half a day waiting for a phone call from the clinic to hear your results. It's all consuming for that time where you're going through it. And then the results afterwards, and then the letdown if the results aren't what you want. So the disruption to your day-to-day life during treatment is just so overwhelming for a person going through it. And so that's where people start to hit sort of a place with their mental health where they need additional support. So that would be the first one. The second one might be the cost. Like I think people think, oh, IVF, it costs $20,000. Like, okay, yeah, that's for the treatment. Then there's the drugs. I did 2 cycles. One cycle, it was $3,000 for the drugs. The second cycle, where I had the exact same results, were $8,000 for the drugs. Totally different protocol, totally different drugs, exactly the same results. It's just different for everybody. It's kind of a big human experiment, to be honest. It's science. And they're just trying to figure out what's going to work for each individual in that chair on that day when they create the protocol. And there's a lot of very smart people in this country who are making, the way that the industry is going is with like so much intelligence, so much artificial intelligence even, and how they're just making waves in the space and improving technology so that we can have babies faster, hopefully. But that's going to come at a cost as well.
Yeah.
And you remember that I remember just getting those prescriptions, and you'd suddenly be like, just get it. And you're like, okay, that'll be $2,800.
Yeah.
And like, Jesus, I wasn't ready for that. It's like I thought last month was like $1,000. And this was $2,800. Yeah, it was that straight sticker shock because you don't know what you're getting and you don't know what your bill is. And you're just kind of like, okay, here we go again. Here's my visa.
Yeah.
And off you go.
Or 4 different visas to pay for this month, because you're just kind of like maxing them out until you can move that all into whatever your remortgage that you're doing or line of credit that you're doing to fund this treatment, because you feel like that's maybe the only option, Yeah.
And that's the other thing too, when you, I guess from taking off work, or you got to go at 7:30. So if someone's late for work, just don't assume that because somebody's coming in late, that, that person's also got to be ready to share when they're ready to say like, well, hey, this is why I need this little bit of time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that person going through it too, I think it's important that they know to find the words. You don't have to disclose everything that's going on, but simply say, hey, the next couple of days, I've got some things going on. I'm going to be late. I'm going to be needing some time, and I'll be back next week, but just need you to know this is what's going on with me. But you know what? I'm going to shift a little bit because this makes me think that here's a situation that, you know, both Rob, Erin, you both have shared, you know, your personal stories. I'm thinking about people who now, you know, with technology are starting to plan their lives. We talked earlier about, you know, here's my daughter. She's 16. She doesn't know what she wants to do yet for work, obviously. She doesn't know what her future family looks like, her career, her relationships. So I feel like the next generation of the workforce will be more vocal in saying, you know what, I'm going to plan my own destiny. Whether I go freeze my eggs today or do this for the just in case. And that has cost as well. It's not cheap either. So I think, you know, maybe talk to me a little bit about some thoughts around that and the creative plan designs or things that employers can start to anticipate of being asked of these types of coverages.
Yeah, you touched on egg freezing, which I think is going to be huge in the next 10 years, even as this generation comes into their sort of childbearing age, but aren't sure. Maybe they haven't found that Prince Charming yet, or maybe they want to work and get their career set before they have kids. But there's a huge education gap around the need to do that. I wish I had been educated enough around this issue to know that I should have, at 25, just spent the $8,000 or accessed a benefit plan if this is the way we're going, and froze my eggs, and then known I have that security around, you know, when I ended up doing IVF, my eggs were 34 or 35 years old. And so they were depleted. There wasn't as much success around the results that I could have had we frozen the eggs at 25 years old. But you just never think it's going to be you. You never anticipate that I'm going to be that 1 in 6, or I'm going to be that one that doesn't get pregnant naturally. I did all the things right. This should happen easily.
I eat well. I'm healthy.
Yeah,
I'll be fine.
totally. Oh yeah, absolutely. You just never expect it. But I think that's going to change too as we change the education and the awareness around this issue, and as more people, you know, the first IVF baby was born in 1981. And so they're 45 years old. And does that math check out?
Sure, run with it. 43 this year. Yeah.
Well, the first IVF baby's 45, so it must have been 1979.
There you go.
But that is all the history that we have around this. And since then, 8 million babies have been born via IVF.
Oh, cool.
And that's a lot of babies. I know for my son in his class, there will be others who were also quote unquote test tube babies. Don't ever say that, please. But that is like an old school phrase to talk about IVF. So there will be others in his class. I'm sure there's other kids in your daughter's classes who were also born via fertility treatment or assisted reproductive technology. So I think this is the way of the future. The birth rate is at its ultimate lowest ever in Canada. I heard that on the news just this week. And so here's a way that employers can support that also, and just helping families, you know, be complete.
And that number, that 1 in 6, is going to be on the rise as people wait longer to have kids.
Yeah.
And we're talking specialty drugs. It's like 1 in 100 people maybe need a specialty drug. And we know the impact it has on programs from that standpoint. As an advisor, Carolyne, to answer your question, one of the things I think about that's common in the US but not available in Canada is obviously we have a tax-free savings account program in Canada, which is great savings. But I'd love to see like a healthcare savings account that employees can contribute to as well, not just employers. So only employers can contribute to a healthcare spending account, but to have a program where employees can share and bank that for a long time. So indefinitely. Yeah. So if I wanted to put $50 away every month, so it's $600 a year, and maybe it's 15, 20 years from now, right? I told the story, on a previous podcast about the fact that, like, you know, I had a benefit plan, and you know, the guy I worked for, his family used everything, and I had to pay for it because, like, you know, and it cost me $300 a month, and I'm like, here I am selling benefit plans, and I didn't even believe in it because I was like, man, I'm spending $300 a month, and I know my dentist, he'd probably clean my teeth for a case of beer, and then to think what fertility cost that wasn't covered, and then my first baby was sick, and then she spent more in the first 12 months of her life than I spent my entire life. And I'm thinking, if I had an ability, if I could have saved for that, obviously hindsight's 2020. maybe people don't take advantage of that just for where money's got to go these days, but have the ability to bank that money long term, because whether it's today or when you're 30 or when you're 40 or when you're 80, we're all going to need healthcare at some point in our lives. And then there's that financial burden that goes with that, whether it's for long-term care or anything in between, down to what we just talked about today with infertility, that you're going to need that. And my biggest concern that I look at too is like how many people are going to start making decisions in this country to pay for either food or to get their teeth fixed or for something else, or whether it's for infertility. So, so it's been enlightening to know that there's options that you've helped push for, Erin. And I love that you push for something and make a difference. And I want to commend you for that. So
thank you.
So thanks for sharing your journey.
Yeah, pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for coming today. And just to wrap things up, Andrew, any final comments or observations you have from our conversation today?
No, I mean, this plan is ready to go. So I guess you could reach out to us if you have questions, or maybe on how to access it, Erin or myself, I guess. And as we've joked about today, I'm happy to play support role in this. Was happy to build it. And I think we'll just expand on it as time goes on, as the needs change. So thank you for inviting us on.
Awesome. And Erin, I mean, from top to bottom, from advisor, business owner, plan member, mother, your personal story has resonated and has brought forth awareness, education, and now solutions. So any final comments from you?
No, it's been a pleasure to be here. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share, talk about my nonprofit, which is making big waves. So if you want to find more information about that, it's oasisfsn.com. We also have a podcast. I'll put a quick shameless plug in for that. It's called Oasis Fertility Podcast, where we just tell stories about infertility. So if you don't believe anything you've heard today, that this journey is hard, I would encourage you to go check that out, because you'll hear real stories of real people who are on the journey and who are on the other side of it and getting through it.
That's awesome. That I can definitely relate to, and more so.
You should come on.
Happy to. And more so to know that there's employers and HR managers that are listening today, go that there's options out there. If you want to provide something that's unique and potentially a lot more cost effective and expanded versus maybe what can be offered under a traditional insurance plan, to know that you've been able to put together some unique options is fantastic, right? So, and when people need it most.
Yeah, I can't wait for the day where in one of my support groups somebody says, my employer just added fertility benefits, and it's through this cool little plan called National Health Claim, and it's a fertility flex plan. So we'll look forward to that day. We'll put that out. We'll manifest it, and yeah, it's gonna be an exciting time, I think, going forward.
Perfect. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today at the Benefits Alliance Voice. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you feel the episode is valuable to you, please feel free to share it with someone you think might benefit from hearing from benefit experts.